Okay. All right.
For coming in. Good morning.
This is great.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We will be getting started in just a moment. As we gather, if you're seeing a poll up in front of your screen, feel free to respond to the questions that will help us get a sense of where in the sector you're coming to us from and what you're most interested in learning about from this webinar. And I'm seeing that we are at our start time now. I'm going to kick us off, everyone. Hi, this is Stephen LaFrance. I'm the founder and CEO of Learning for Action and former board chair of First Place for Youth. I'm very pleased to welcome you to Evidence Building from the Inside Out, Insights, Best Practices, and Priorities for Nonprofits. This is very much the culmination of more than a decade of work and effort that First Place has been engaged in to ensure they make good on their commitment to equitable outcomes for young people, ensuring that every young person in program has a very good shot at succeeding. And that has meant taking a hard look at how each young person can get the services that they need, which is the definition of equity. So our objectives for today are to describe the current state of evidence building practice in the sector, as well as the drive around equitable and practitioner-centered data use and methodology. We're going to talk about how you cultivate support and buy-in for evidence building among key groups who are at the center of your work, including your board, funders, and so forth. We're going to provide you with some examples of how evidence from work on the ground can address system barriers and drive measurable impact at scale. We're going to share some lessons learned about what this work really takes, what kinds of investments, partnerships, the risks and benefits of going down a path of building evidence for your work. And then lastly, we're going to identify some directions of for the future of evidence building as we see it. And without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce First Place for Youth's Chief Innovation Officer, Erica Van Buren. Erica has been leading the work at First Place to get us to the point where we are really able to take a close look at how the staff and team can support young people to achieve the optimal outcomes while they're with First Place. And so with that, Erica, I turn it to you, and thank you so much for your leadership in this work and space.
Thank you, Stephen. Gives me great pleasure to introduce our esteemed panel, of which you are one of them, Stephen. Each of the folks in this panel is on here by design. They played a unique and pivotal role in First Place's road to building evidence and our vision for impact. And I have the tremendous fortune to be able to call them partners, advisors, mentors, and friends. So without further ado, let's get on with the introductions. I'm going to start with Stephen. For those of you who don't know Stephen, you should rectify that situation immediately. Stephen, as the founder and CEO of Learning for Action, has helped hundreds of nonprofits, foundations, and public agencies to advance their knowledge, capacity, and culture of learning, all in service to equity and justice. And he's recognized as a national leader in the fields of performance management and organizational effectiveness. And Stephen holds subject matter expertise in too many areas for me to name today. He's a true champion of nonprofits using data and insights to drive decisions that optimize social impact. And as he mentioned, First Place had the amazing privilege to have him at the helm of our board for how long was it? 10 years, 15 years?
10 years.
Where his leadership helped to instill a value for this pathway. And he served as a strategic advisor and mentor to me. So he knows First Place intimately. And is the perfect person to moderate this session. So thank you, Stephen. Jan DeCourcy has been one of the wisest thought partners for me and for First Place on all things related to our population of focus and research and evaluation in the child welfare space. She is currently working to help lead the child welfare research agenda at Child Trends and has over 20 years of experience in research, evaluation, and program operation in the fields of child welfare, transition to adulthood, and youth and adult workforce development. Jan works with programs and systems to build promising and effective practices through technical assistance, formative studies, and outcome studies. And over the past 10 years, Jan, in several different roles, has been one of, if not the biggest evaluation partner for First Place, having conducted both our feasibility study and our evaluability assessment. So thank you so much for being here, Jan. Wouldn't be the same without you. Kelly Fitzsimmons. Kelly is a rainmaker in the social innovation space nationally, and the founder and CEO of one of my favorite evaluation capacity and field building organizations, Project Evident. She has served as the Vice President and Chief Program and Strategy Officer at the Edna McConnell Clark Foundation, where she led policy innovation, evaluation, grant making, and the early capital aggregation pilot. She co-founded Leadwell Partners and New Profit Inc., and has led from within nonprofit organizations as well. She has been a friend and a huge supporter of First Place. Thank you for being here, Kelly. Peter York, last but not least. Peter York is principal at BCT Partners. He has over 20 years of experience as a consultant and researcher in the evaluation and nonprofit fields, as well as a national spokesperson for social impact and impact measurement issues. He has designed and led numerous research and evaluation studies with private philanthropies, corporations, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies. And Pete has pioneered the integration of data science, machine learning, and traditional research methods for practitioner-centric data use. He has been a wonderful partner to First Place in building a cutting-edge decision support tool that I'll get into a little bit later, that has been the gift that keeps on giving in our equity and impact work. And he's a bit of a unicorn among data scientists. Thank you so much, Pete, for being here. And I will add that Jane Schroeder, I know, was listed as a panelist. She is here. She's our Chief Policy Officer, but she's going to be supporting us from behind the scenes today to help field some questions. Next, let's bring up our slide deck. We've got a timeline to go through. Okay, before we get into the rich dialogue with our panelists, I want to provide a bit of context for the conversation with a brief history of First Place's evidence building story and where we're going. I look at the arc of this journey as moving from building capacity to building culture and then accountability, with a lot of overlap and intersectionality in between. First Place was founded in 1998 as a direct service and policy organization with the mission to help foster youth build the skills they need to make a successful transition to self-sufficiency. We provide a stable foundation of housing and rigorous employment, education, and care management services through our My First Place model to support young people on the path to independence. And we are a learning organization. Our investment in becoming a learning and results-driven org really kicked into overdrive in 2007, when we acquired our first performance management system, built it out, and then had to rebuild it after developing our theory of change in 2008, when we realized that the two were not aligned. Word to the wise, don't do that. In 2009, we underwent an organizational assessment with David Hunter, which is a kick the tires assessment on our program model, and had to cut that process short because what was happening on the ground wasn't aligned with what we said we were doing. And that was a hard truth for us. So after that, it was all hands on deck to build implementation and evaluation capacity to correspond with our theory of change. And a few years later, we launched a large-scale formative evaluation from 2010 to 2012 with really favorable results. So we were riding high off of that. In 2013, we developed our first strategic plan, and because of our favorable formative eval results, we centered our plan on demonstrating our effectiveness as one of our core strategic goals. And to this day, that has really served as a pillar for driving organizational impact and strategic investments at First Place. As we were feeling ourselves because of our formative evaluation results and gearing up for a feasibility study to determine how we would implement a rigorous impact evaluation, implementation of extended foster care was taking shape in the state of California and started presenting significant challenges for First Place and the system. This showed up in the fact that the length of our program tenure for our young people and our outcomes began to drop significantly. Enter Jan DeCourcy and MDRC, who conducted our feasibility study and ultimately determined that the policy and service implementation landscape for extended foster care was a bit like the wild, wild west and needed more time to incubate and stabilize as counties figured out how to implement. And First Place also needed to adapt its program model to better support young people who were opting into extended foster care. Yeah, these young people actually looked a bit different in terms of needs and relationship to the system relative to youth we had served in the past. And I think the biggest takeaway for us was that it may be all but impossible for First Place to conduct a gold standard impact evaluation in the form of a randomized controlled trial in the state of California due to issues with needed sample size and determining a distinct counterfactual or comparison group. This was a critical inflection point for us. We were like, okay, well, if a randomized controlled trial is a non-starter in California, let's explore alternative evidence building strategies. And in 2014, this is when we started our long-standing data science love affair with Peter York to develop not one, but 2 generations of a web-based decision support tool that we now lovingly call the Youth Roadmap to Success tool. This is designed by and for practitioners and youth to optimize equitable and results-driven practice, and that leverages machine learning models and quasi-experimental methods. Next slide. Also, in 2017 and 2018, we partnered with Kelly Fitzsimmons and her team at Project Evident to develop a strategic evidence plan, which helped us to identify and develop key areas of internal evidence building and learning capacity, including test and learn improvement methods, a strategic research partner with Mark Courtney out of the University of Chicago and the CalU study to explore policy relevant research questions associated with the impact of extended foster care that was of mutual interest, to engineer how we learn and scale our model to our network affiliate partners, and to create ownership and shared accountability for how we build and own data across the organization with program, policy, and evaluation and learning. Our strategic evidence plan also compelled us to do an evaluability assessment, again with Jan and her colleagues in 2018. The results of that evaluability assessment provided a whole new set of learning questions and cross-departmental capacity building objectives that became a primary focus of our strategic work. And it included developing more powerful employment and education interventions and aligning towards one result across the organization to improve living wage, career-related employment outcomes for our young people. So that roughly brings us up to date. Today, we are continuing to refine our programs and strengthening our capacity for advanced test and learn methods, including iterative experimentation internally. We are integrating improvement and implementation science techniques into how we help practitioners install, adopt, and sustain effective practices, both at our brick and mortar sites and among our national partners. And at every opportunity, we are disseminating the knowledge we are discovering to leverage learning towards systems change in an effort to eliminate the disparities among older youth in foster care. And I hope that the high level takeaway from this story is this: we are 15 years into this continuous journey. It does not end. We will continuously be moving in the direction to try and actualize our vision. And it isn't for the faint of heart. It has been paved with major roadblocks, peaks, and valleys. But I have receipts and evidence to show that it is doable and it is worth it. And that is what we believe our young people deserve from us. So with that, I want to give you a quick visual of our Youth Roadmap tool, which is the decision support tool that we've developed with Pete, so that when we're talking about it, you know what we're talking about and what it means. The Youth Roadmap tool is a dynamic, interactive dashboard that was aligned with our care managers, was designed with our care managers and employment and education specialists by our phenomenal VP of Evaluation and Learning, Matt Levy, and the good folks at BCT Partners. It provides individualized recommendations for each youth on how to optimize their potential to leave our program with that living wage career-related job. At the youth level, practitioners can get high impact recommendations for each youth based on what has worked in the past for youth with similar strengths and needs. and provides a tailored set of practice guidelines that link to the dashboard to support the selection and use of effective interventions and practices. It updates every day so practitioners can track change and progress at the youth level in an almost real-time data environment. Next slide. The progress level dashboard provides both a global and monthly play-by-play for managers on youth progress towards achieving in-program milestones and service goals that increase young people's likelihood of getting living wage jobs, as well as a summary of how many young people are getting what works. There are other features that could take the entire hour to describe, but I will pause there. And I'm going to turn it back over to Stephen to launch our panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Erica, for sharing that really helpful context. Before we move into the panel discussion, if we could, I'd like to just take a quick look at the poll results so we have a sense of who's in the room. I see that we have a majority of folks who are providers and advocates working directly in nonprofits, which is fantastic. We're really happy to have you here, as well as everyone else who's representing other parts of the sector. But since this is practitioner-centered, we really warmly welcome you. And there's I see a distribution across the objectives, although really learning about the current state of evidence-building practices in the sector and specific examples of what this looks like, I see are really kind of rising to the top. So hopefully we'll be addressing each of these objectives directly. We will have Q&A at the end of the session. Please feel free to put questions as they occur to you in the chat. We may be able to address one or two along the way, but we are dedicated to leaving time at the end to make sure that we get to some of your questions at least. So with that, Kelly, I'd love to turn to you as the founder and CEO of a national organization established explicitly to build the field's capacity for evidence building and advancing measurable impact. What do you see as trends in the sector? And what is evidence building? Is that part of what you see as a trend in the sector?
Thanks, Stephen, and also Erica. Thank you for that overview and walk through all the incredible work that you in First Place have done. I think, Stephen, as we maybe look back, 5 years ago and look ahead, I think we are actually at a time of dramatic sea change in evaluation and a shift away from thumbs up, thumbs down evaluation, perhaps of the past, not entirely, but we're making progress towards a more dynamic, continuous evidence building mindset. And so when we think about evidence building, we think about what data, what information do you need to do a set of things, to make a set of decisions? And what is the right context for that? How do you, as Erica's saying, like, this isn't finished, this isn't one and done. How do you build that into your work day to day over time? And so I think as we step back a little bit, do some stock taking, we're seeing a drive towards what we would call actionability. Are we building data and evidence for use in the context that we're operating in? Are we building the evidence that we need to do the things that we need to do for the communities that we serve, for the young people that we serve? Are we centering them? As funders, as supporters, as technical assistance providers, are we centering practitioners in the work because they are the ones most accountable for delivering services to students, to community? Are we thinking about the relevance of what we're doing and sort of the building of evidence, the evaluation approach that we're taking, and really contextualizing that work? So I think under that umbrella, there's sort of three major themes or sub themes that I would bubble up, and I think that we've heard that from Erica, and we're going to hear that from other panelists later in the discussion. But the big one is we've broadened the definition of data and evidence use over the past 5 years. I think we're freeing up from tyranny of tiered frameworks, if you will, into broader definitions. And we're valuing decision-making nearly as much as judgment. We value learning as nearly as much as compliance. And those are really important shifts because that also broadens our thinking about data and evidence, not just within the constraints of evaluation, but also for decision science, for knowledge management. Will let us catch up, I think, presumably to where other sectors are way ahead with regard to these applications. Secondly, I think we are seeing today and going forward for sure a greater opportunity to drive more impact at the intersection of equity and evidence, not only with regard to which equitable outcomes are we aiming at, but how are we driving equity into the process of building and using data and evidence? Are we really being attentive to what questions we're asking to whom, who we're including, the nature, the cleanliness, the debias of the data sets that we're using, and who's involved in the process? And then thirdly, I think we're seeing a bigger swing to impact management, if you will, to this attention as leadership. Evaluation used to be the thing on the side a few years ago. It was often the thing was lopped off when it came to budgets. It was often not integrated with program design. It was often not something CEOs were paying a lot of attention to. And I think we're seeing a groundswell of shift of leadership really embracing this direction going forward.
Thank you, Kelly. I think some of your comments touch upon this, but what would you add to the question of what are like the must-haves for success in this work?
So maybe building on that last point, leadership as a broad category. Yes, of course, a tremendous person that I met who's leading the charge in healthcare in Ghana shared a statement with me I'll never forget. Leadership is cause, everything else is effect. And the type of leadership, I think that you heard this in Erica and you've heard this in First Place for Youth. I think they embody this is what we call constructive dissatisfaction. Mm-hmm. That ability to lean into hard truth, that ability to not rest on the laurels, not see outcomes as the thing that is in service of marketing, but is the thing in service of equity and making things better for those we're in service with. So that is a hallmark, a type of leadership. That commitment to understanding the requisite and necessary capacity to do the work and build that capacity, make the space and time for building that capacity, and not necessarily jumping ahead. I think being realistic, but making progress. And that integration with strategy, I think as we were, Erica mentioned, obviously we're big fans of strategic evidence building, but not allowing those two things to become divorced. If evidence building is not in service of strategic purpose, it really isn't, it's not serving its intent. So I think those three things are, critical. You see looking at Erica's timeline in retrospect, it looks like a really coherent roadmap, but we know the story behind the story and the struggles to get there.
Yeah.
But we as a field can get, smarter, faster. We can accelerate this learning because we've had early adopters like, those here that we can learn from and lift up practice. But I think those are the three things: leadership, capacity, and strategy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm going to move us to, thank you so much, Kelly. Really helpful insights. I know that we'll want to get to what are some of the challenges, and I'm sure we will over the course of the discussion. But turning to you, Jan, as someone who is doing research and evaluation work in the field, what do you think organizations should do in thinking about their readiness for rigorous evaluation? So, as we think about supporting groups and moving, along a continuum of readiness, in many ways, Erica's timeline, modeled that kind of intentionality. But what advice would you give to groups in thinking about, how they should reflect on their readiness for having someone come in from the outside and take a look at their program?
First of all, again, and thank you to everyone here, but also for Erica for that terrific history of evidence building for youth.
Are others hearing her?
Jan, I think you're cutting out, Jan. Okay. Jan, I'm going to move to engaging Peter at this point, and we'll come back to you. So Peter, you've been doing this incredibly groundbreaking work in the field of data science around alternative evidence building techniques. How do you see predictive modeling addressing gaps in the field of evidence building and impact? You know, like we heard Erica say, First Place explored what were kind of the conventional routes and found themselves staring at stop sign. So how do you see predictive modeling as an alternative? And let's start there, and then I'll maybe ask you some follow-ups.
Sure. Let me start by framing it in this way. So where predictive modeling comes in is that, you know, as a longtime evaluator, I actually started my career as a practitioner on the front lines. I worked inpatient psych with kids. I was a caseworker for the homeless, spent 9 years on the front lines as a practitioner. Became an evaluator after I went to graduate school, became an evaluator, and really spent, it's funny, I just added up, it's actually 27 years that I've been an evaluator in the space, working with philanthropy, nonprofits. And as an evaluator, the information that I was doing, no matter what the rigor of the evaluation, from randomized controlled trials all the way down to just more less rigorous, if you will, evaluations of different efforts and programs. And the thing that we always strive for was to be able to bring the insights of those evaluation findings to the practitioner. But there's always been this stop sign, as you were just talking about. Mm-hmm. 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, about 9+ years ago, I discovered the world of data science. And it was kind of happenstance and thinking about, you know, this idea that, you know, when I'm watching a Netflix movie or reading a book, and there's the capability of being able to use data to find people like me and things I like to watch and make some connections and see this kind of predictive analytics at work on the individual level. And the germ of the thought was, well, wait a minute, why can't we use these tools to do the translational work from evaluation down to that predictive analytics? And so I think the opportunity, and so I think what it's really creating is an opportunity. It's an orientation that I had not been trained on. Predictive analytics means a lot. Data science is in a world that's very different than social science. And I think that there's a lot of work we've had to do to bring these two worlds together, especially if we're going to do it with equity, really reducing bias and everything else. But the principle of being able to provide insights in real time using technology and data science tools on a case-by-case basis to help support decision-making on the front lines was that opportunity for finally coming together of where the practitioner meets the data. But it is a shift in orientation to our evaluation work, because it shifts the orientation of a lot of our training as evaluators and social scientists and evidence generators is focused on population averages, which is very important for funding and policymaking. But when you're trying to use that evidence on the front lines and somebody says, please administer this with fidelity as it was in this unnatural experimental setting, we on the front lines would laugh at you, like on a case-by-case basis, and be frustrated if you're, intending to force us into that box. So I really think the opportunity here is to bring these tools, and I think we almost have to begin to not talk about it as predictive analytics per se, because I think that comes with a lot of baggage, and we have a lot of issues around the biases that are inherent there. And I think we have to talk about that and address that. And I think we have ways to do that. But the fundamental piece where things are really going, and that we now know that we have the technological capabilities, the tools, and if social science can come together with data science and really bring these two tools together, we can now actually bring insights, as Erica demonstrated in some of those screenshots. These are real-time opportunities for people to really meet people where they are. A cornerstone of this is like in the Netflix stuff, but if you take it one step further, we're actually studying in history how different groups of youth, for example, are treated by a program. And if they're very similar youth, but treated slightly differently, these are natural experiments, real world experiments that happen in history. And we can use data to figure out and understand what would work. and deliver those insights. So I think the opportunity as we start to look at this is, and where we see predictive modeling really helping and to address some of these gaps, it's the gap between the kind of average base research and the practitioner,
Right.
and being able to bring those insights there. And I think the bridge is the kind of tools from data science with one important caveat. It really needs to be led transparently by those who really do understand, what the difference between causation and correlation, understands issues of equity and how to look at demographic data, making sure there's transparency, things like peer review, things that, we can see what's going on in order to do this work. But if we get there, that's the opportunity to bridge that gap. And I think that's a gap that has been yet to be bridged, but now is possible.
Pete, this is so, I'm sure, tantalizing for folks to hear about. And could you break down some of what are the building blocks, or prerequisites? What are some steps people could take to get there?
Yeah, so I think for most organizations, they're in a situation where they've begun the journey of starting to build and or using program administrative data tools. So if you think of the software out there, I know that First Place for Youth is using Apricot in their history. There are other tools out there like Salesforce. There are so many different tools, and I don't want to espouse one or the other. The key is to get started and begin to and think, as we in the evaluation world do, in terms of making sure that when we're implementing those systems to monitor, track, and assess longitudinally all those we serve, that you start getting into that space and start gathering that data. If you have that system, it's an opportunity to begin to enhance that data. Think in logic models. Does your program administrative data, does it have input data, context information, history, intervention data, and some outcome data, or at least some milestone data, goal achievement data? If it doesn't, make sure you start to bring that together. Once you get to that place, and so many organizations are, and you achieve 250 more or more cases, you can reach a place of longitudinal data. You're beginning to develop the kind of data, as long as it's been consistent. See, part of the challenge with a lot of organizations is they don't have those systems, or they don't have those systems and they have the systems and they keep changing their metrics. Okay. The value of ongoing learning is to have some consistent measurement that you have. And we always say 250 organizations with 250 completions of cases in a longitudinal data set, administrative data set, is a starting place.
Mm-hmm.
And now there are a lot of other techniques and tools and a lot more people doing this and a lot of writing and other techniques. And I won't go into that. But the point is, there's a foundational piece, and it has to start with data. And that's thankfully proliferating. However, a lot of those data systems, we do have to move beyond just descriptives.
Right.
Descriptives can be deceptive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we really do need to start to bring a little bit more rigor to our data. But as soon as you get that data going, that's where your readiness is.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Pete. Well, one of the other kind of a different kind of readiness factor, if you will, or condition for success, really goes back to some of the points, Kelly, you were making earlier about leadership and capacity and strategy. And so I just wanted to pose the question, Kelly, Erica, weigh in. I have a perspective as well on, how do you get folks on board with this? How do you drive conversations with the stakeholders who, need to be behind this work, both for your individual service provision, for program success and outcomes for young people, but also to drive strategy that is at the systems level. So again, I'll open it to Kelly and Erica, either of you who would like to respond, and I'll quickly add my perspective.
Well, I can start by saying, Stephen, you were a linchpin for us. I mean, the role of compelling the board and building the board's capacity to support this work is a process. And I think having a champion within the inner circle that could speak to why strategic investments in innovation, why strategic investments in staff was critical to the mission. And to the strategic arc of where First Place was going. Stephen, you held that voice, right? You held that for us. And you were also a conduit of information to me and to our then CEO, Sam Cobbs, to help bring it to life, right? So there was horizontal and vertical information that was constantly being communicated internally in the organization and to the board to get alignment on what the priorities were and not chasing the shiny penny, right? And that's, I think, that was a big, big undertaking. I'm sure I'm not even doing it justice, but that to me made all the difference in the world. So that's one thing I would add. And Stephen, I don't know if you want to
Sure.
say any more about that, but
I will just say very quickly that, you know, the role I played, I think, was fundamentally, like you said, kind of translating for the rest of the board members for whom, you know, evaluation and data was not there. You know, they didn't really understand it. It was helping them to understand the importance and why it showed up in our budget line items at the size it did. But more than that, I also want to say that there was a major milestone, I believe, in creating a pillar of our strategic plan that was around data and evidence. And one of the questions that in my broader work in the sector, I don't often see organizations ask themselves the question, what is the role of data in advancing my strategy? You know, what is the role of evidence? How is it going to support better outcomes for young people? How is it going to support more systemic change at scale? So I just want to put a pin in that. I think that was huge.
Can I just add also, I think in our case, that also elevated the visibility, the importance and relevance of the evaluation and learning function in our organization, so that it was closer to the C-suite level and there was more of a conduit of learning that was taking place at all levels. What it also did was it created more accountability for others to own the data, like outside of evaluation and learning, right? Because it was always at top of mind. So we all had to kind of, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but that really, I think, created an overarching set of goals and structures that inherently created that accountability.
Thanks, Erica. Kelly, any other pearls of wisdom you'd offer?
I think just quickly in this, there will be some overlap with both of your comments, but I think money and change management, and they really do need to be braided together. So money from the perspective of sufficient funding to do the work, so it's not an unfunded mandate. And it does show up in budgets. The priorities are inculcated into the budget. And not on the fungible side of the budget, but like, you know, in core. And that is really, really important because not only does that prioritize resource allocation, but it gives permission. And then from a change management perspective, you know, the thing that we want to encourage here is managerial courage. The thing we want to, you know, give rise to is adults learning new things, which can be intimidating, can be frightening. A lot of what Pete is working on is critically important, but unfamiliar to most. And so how do we bridge that gap and how do we help people grow and evolve together and safely? So knowing those dollars are set aside for the work, being able to support change management and supporting courage and giving rise to that is critically important for both internal and external partners, both so the staff, the teams that we're working with inside organizations, but quite frankly, also for our technical assistance providers and our funders often. It was just a quick example, like the language that we use in a lot of this work can be very alienating, and lifting it out into more common narrative and better storytelling, I think is critical for change management.
Yeah.
I've had funders say to me, I get the evaluation side, but why do you need the data? And that backwards walk is actually a necessary competence we have to become good at so we can thread the needle to those who don't speak quasi-experimental design, but they might recognize R&D, might recognize we want to make this thing work the same way my phone works. So how do we start telling the stories of the work to facilitate that change management and secure the resources so we can de-risk it while we're strengthening our courage to engage?
Fantastic. So helpful, Kelly. Pete, I see you gesturing.
Just 1 second, just one comment on top of that. So what Kelly was just saying too, and I think that is to start to think about this use of evidence when we start to bring it to the practitioner. It's really changing this orientation as evidence generation as overhead to evidence generation as program. It's a part of program, and we center it in the practitioner. And I think that's both philosophically necessary, and it even orients how we do this work. One of the things I should have mentioned when we were talking about kind of what are the prerequisites, we also have to design the tools, and Erica highlighted this. They have to be designed by the practitioners for the practitioners in their language. Okay, so part of this is really a different orientation to what we're used to as evidence generators in the evaluation space. And it's really important that it becomes like, you talk about human-centered design. You know, if you're building program tools, which is what we're talking about for practitioners, it's practitioner-centered design.
Right.
And an organization has to be supported by leadership, the dollars, and start to integrate the dollars, but orient the board and everybody else in the management as this is a program expense. Fortunately, the nonprofit sector is starting to veer into and lean more into the fact that overhead is not a bad thing, but I still think we've got a long way to go. And so I think we've got to reorient this and focus on that practitioner piece.
Those are such hugely helpful insights, and you're really touching a lot upon how we need to really question some of what have been the myths and assumed orthodoxies, you know, in our sector, and just turn them on our head and center back the, you know, in first place this case, young people and the providers serving them. Jan, welcome back. Sorry to hear there's an outage in Chicago. Unavoidable trouble and, you know, Murphy's Law perhaps in some ways, but would you like to comment a little bit on where we were beginning to go with your experience on how folks can think about their readiness for, you know, kind of getting their internal house in order before having someone come in from the outside and do third-party work?
Yeah, and just give me a thumbs down if I should turn off my video, which maybe should be right now.
So far,
Okay, so in following this conversation, I would say that if I was just starting this work, I might be a little bit lost in terms of thinking about data and how much data I might need and what that data should look like and how to back up and think about where to get started is, I think, a great question. And I want to just also get to the point where we're talking about how program readiness for evaluation isn't necessarily on the program. It's on the evaluator and the program to work together to establish a better understanding of what both are doing. And I think that that's something that evaluators have kind of sometimes let go of, is that it's also their job to really dig in and get what's happening in programs and what participants are experiencing and what participants have to say about it. In thinking about all that, I mean, the field of evidence building, like Kelly was saying, has come so far in terms of thinking about the different kinds of evaluations and different kinds of evaluative work that we can do to build evidence. And it's not all rigorous assessment and randomized controlled trials and quasi-experimental designs. It's thinking about the environment and the context that you operate in and how that influences what you do and what kinds of information that you can collect. And it's also thinking about the ways that you can improve and those different chunks of the work that you're doing that can be improved upon to get to better outcomes. I also just want to make sure that I touch on the point about outcomes that I've been sort of thinking about lately, and that is, who is defining outcomes? And yes, evaluators we know are defining outcomes, funders are defining outcomes, programs are defining outcomes. And I think there's a real gap there, and that we're not asking those people who are affected the most by the things that we do in programs, what they're getting out of it and what they value in terms of outcomes. And so I think that's a huge gap in this field and in the data that we're collecting probably. And the thing that we can all do a better job on is listening and asking the right questions of the right people and doing a really good job listening to better understand what we're doing and the ways that it's actually affecting people.
Wonderful, Jen. Thank you. And I feel like there's a really beautiful tie in there with comments you were making earlier, Pete, about some of the prerequisites for predictive modeling. So as I put in the chat, we will have time for questions. So please do be thinking about any questions you have. One of the things that we wanted to also touch upon, and maybe we can have a few comments really from any of the panelists on, you know, what are the trade-offs that we see, or are there trade-offs between, you know, pursuing a rigorous evidence building agenda and, you know, determining like a right learning agenda? You know, does going on an evidence building path kind of set you off in one direction and preclude a more organic kind of learning agenda? You know, what are the trade-offs? How do we think about these things alongside each other?
So, Stephen, if I can just jump in, I would love for us to reclaim the word rigor, because it is not synonymous with randomized control trial. I looked it up in the dictionary. That is not the case. Everything that we're talking about here today is done with rigor. It is done with intentionality and thoughtfulness appropriate to the context, the questions that need to be answered. So I think about Pete's work, and there's a great deal of rigor on multiple dimensions. The rigor with which Erica's designed the roadmap, the rigor with which Jan just describes some of the components and the responsibilities that both evaluators and practitioners need to take before they enter into an engagement. So I think what we are talking here about evidence building as a rigorous and solid and good practice for getting the information that we need to make the decisions that we need to make in service of students, young people, adults that we're working with. So I'd love to actually see these things merge and come together with a shared understanding that we mix and match different methods, different approaches along a more intentional roadmap. And that these various components are able to talk to one another rather than being at cross purposes or speaking different languages. So if Erica is a practitioner or any other practitioner out there has a vision for what they want to accomplish, they can lay out that vision and roadmap and equally go to Pete and Jan and anybody else and say, can you help me with this leg of the journey? Or how would you advise me to do X, Y, and Z? Well, that is rigor to me.
I couldn't agree more. And that actually tees up very well, turning to Erica and have you speak, if you would, a little bit, Erica, about, in your role of, crafting and leading this work and the impact agenda for First Place, what have been some of the kind of game changers for you in kind of aligning mission with your impact agenda, getting support and ownership and accountability for the journey in the organization, as well as holding equity at the center of the work?
Right. So there's three parts to that question. I'll take them in turn. I don't really have a whole lot more to add to what I think you and Kelly really lifted up in the way of leadership. I can put a little bit more color on it. There is the constructive dissatisfaction. There's also from the CEO, there's the modeling and the transparency, modeling the value of learning. When I came to First Place in 2013, I came under Sam Cobbs, and this was just kind of how he rolled. He would come to me with research questions and his own hypotheses about how the work was happening, what was the cause and effect relationships that he wanted me to explore. And then he used that information, he talked to people, he used that information to make decisions. And he made that a very demonstrative practice, right? So how you make data to drive those decisions. He also elevated the learnings and the data publicly. So we have this thing called game plan, where we're tying the work and the use of data to tell the story to our larger mission. And everyone in the organization has an opportunity to do that. Frontline staff, some of our young people have gotten up and talked about data, our managers, leaders, all the way up and down the line. And then explaining over and over about how the move to build evidence and get better supports actually outcomes for young people. So you have to be that constant, like beating the drum around how this work actually does support the results that you're trying to achieve. The strategic plan, putting that, like you said, Stephen, the demonstrated effectiveness into the strategic plan. Those are all things that have been game changers for me, being able to be a change champion and a change agent at First Place. When it comes to supporting ownership and accountability, I think there's a couple of catalysts that I've seen happen over the years. We got really clear on defining the roles, responsibilities, and expected relationships between evaluation and learning. We also have our policy folks and our program departments being very explicit. So for instance, because I've seen it happen a lot of different ways where the wrong function lives with the wrong folks who are responsible, right? But continuous quality improvement at First Place lives it with program. And evaluation and learning supports that, but program drives it with support from young people, from staff. And then we also have very clear intersectional relationships in how data is discovered, how it is mined and made sense of, and then moves to helping us establish our policy agenda. And there's a great book that's going to be coming out from Project Evident and the Brookings Institute called the Actionable Evidence. I think that's what the title of the book is. And we talk about this. We talk about how we got clear on our roles. And then we also came up with that one result. We aligned our contributions towards action around this one goal that included our work plans, that included our targets, et cetera. And that helped. That was a major game changer. And then finally, I think with high accountability to results, staff need and deserve high levels of support. And what we're really trying to do and investing in building our capacity is to support the drivers of implementation and behavior change through training, coaching, and supervision. We have this wonderful practice and DEI expert by the name of Deandra Jones, who serves as the coach to the coaches, who are our mid-level managers, both nationally and at home. And then I think we've also, and this is going to be a lead into the equity piece, taking a hard look at how we innovate and roll out new program innovations and understand their impact. Like, how do we design and learn, to Jan's point, was a big shift for us. Previously, what we would do is throw a whole bunch of stuff at the wall to see what stuck. It's the launch and pray approach. Didn't work. We are now really intentional about involving evaluation and learning staff, our young people, at the design phase as part of how we create, test, and learn and build evidence of what works. So lots more to say, but I know we need to move on.
Well, Erica, I think let's roll while you're on. That one question, so moving into the Q&A part of the session, we got a question for you about, how are those beautiful tools built? The decision tool that supports, program implementers and in their work with participants. It's probably a long answer to that, but what's the short answer to how the tools are built?
I think is Erica frozen? I think they were asking you, Erica.
Oh, I did freeze. Repeat the question. I'm sorry, Stephen.
How was the YRT built, the decision-making tool?
How was it built? It was built with practitioners and young people. They actually, our VP of Evaluation and Learning, Matt Levy, is very savvy in human-centered design approaches. So he was really building in not only the results of the modeling process, but he was also building in additional data that practitioners wanted to help them make meaning of how they approached the planning and implementation of these recommendations that were in the system. I look at the Youth Roadmap tool as an equity tool because it actually helps to create what we call a targeted approach to the implementation of what is really a universal policy that is extended foster care. Everyone gets the same thing, according to the way the extended foster care legislation is drafted, we've created an individualized approach using this tool. So every young person gets what they need to achieve the outcome that we're interested in helping them achieve.
And if people want to learn more, there's the case study also that Project Evident produced that I think can share a little bit more about all the roles that all of the folks that Erica's talking about, all the different roles that played in terms of how they collaborated during the build and putting it all together. So the case profile, I was looking for the link here, but if somebody could pull up a link, we could post a link to the case profile of which First Place for Youth is
And
exploited.
in the meantime, Erica, or Pete, can you give us an example of how participant insight was incorporated into the design of the tool? Like, just make it real.
I'll let you do that, Erica.
Yeah, we did PDSAs, right? Our Plan, Do, Study, Act process was used. So we have a young adult leadership council. We took it to them. We talked to them about it, what they could use it for. We took it to I believe we took it to every single site and tested with them and got feedback about what the interface, how the interface was working. We are going to be obviously, and we're going to be incorporating a youth-focused dashboard at some point, which is one of our goals. Right now, we're focusing on practitioners' use of it with young people. And circulating how it's being used by young people we have a little newsletter that we send out about tips for how to use the Youth Roadmap tool in practice, which our program leadership and our evaluation and learning leadership have put together, but it highlights how they're using it with young people so that other practitioners can adopt it. And so we're continuously figuring out how to showcase the role of young people in that, but they were involved in the design. We had young people who were part of our initial planning and execution committee that helped us with the thinking about what it should be and what it should target.
Fantastic, thank you. Thanks to all of you. We're just about coming to the close of our session, and with just a few minutes left, I'm appreciating Kelly and Christy, thank you for putting some links in the chat. We have some other resources that will be on the landing page for the webinar. There's a readiness rubric that you can take a look at to see where are you on a continuum of readiness to engage in third-party evaluation work. The actionable evidence case study book will be available, as well as the research brief that this all came out of Raising the Bar. There was one additional question. Are the youth tools through your database or an external system? Is that a quick one, Erica, that you can respond to?
It's quick. It's quick. Peter, you want to talk about that?
It's through their, again, their program administrative data system, and then obviously the resources. So there's two parts to it. There's the program administrative data system that sits behind First Place for Youth and all that data that's being captured. Key point, that data is already being captured. It was leveraged for building these tools. So it's not a new system, okay? And that's an important point. Secondly, you can speak, Erica, to, you've also integrated all of the practice tools and all of that are connected to that tool. And just so you all know, we use Power BI as a way to present that information. It's a very versatile tool in terms of being able to do that, but others may use Tableau or some other tools.
Great, thank you. I know that these very practical, tactical questions are super helpful to have answered. And thanks, Matt, for elaborating in the chat. As we close out, we'd love for all of you to just take a minute to put into the chat any thoughts or hopes you have for what the future might look like for nonprofit evidence building and support for capacity to build evidence in the nonprofit sector. So if you would please just reflect and put some thoughts in the chat. What are your predictions or hopes for the future of nonprofit evidence building capacity? And as you're thinking about the thoughts you want to leave us with, I just want to take a moment to say thank you in a big heartfelt way, first and foremost to you, Erica, for all the effort, work, and leadership that you've provided to get the system and journey to where we are today. Thanks, Kelly, for your insights from the breadth and depth of experience you bring in the sector. Pete, for your unicornness in being like a really approachable and grounded data scientist. Grounded in the work, in what it means to bring the data to life and to real people's improve real people's lives. And Jan, for all you've done to really advance the sector, dedicating your life to children and youth research and evaluation, so that we can all understand what practices are most effective and what should be taken to scale, and how we can improve systems and programs both to address inequities in our communities that children and youth and families experience. Eric, I'll turn to you for any closing words.
Yes, thank you again to all of the panelists and the participants. I'm going to actually have our Vanna White Alyssa bring up one last plug, which is if you want to hear more about precision analytics, the road to building our decision support tool, Project Evident is sponsoring another webinar next week. So Pete and I will be back, and we'll be having a conversation with Kelly about what it took to get there, what we learned, and what are some of the really like catalytic and unintended benefits, challenges, et cetera, that we experienced. So we hope you'll join us. That will be coming through on the email after the close of the webinar as well. So thanks to everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone. Be well.